Yeah, the thing I find most tricky is when people don't recognize you particularly, but half recognize you.
There are some characters so iconic, so deeply woven into childhood memories, that we start to believe the person behind them must have lived the same joyful chaos we watched on screen. And for millions around the world, Mr. Bean is exactly that character. A timeless, almost magical presence who could make an entire room laugh without saying a single word. But now, at 69, Rowan Atkinson has finally opened up about what was really happening behind that silent, mischievous smile. And the truth is far more emotional, far more human, and far more unexpected than anyone imagined. For years, fans assumed the Mr. Bean set was a place filled with endless laughter. After all, how could something so funny be stressful? But the man who created the character, the only person who truly knew the cost of bringing him to life, has revealed a very different story. One that explains why he stepped away and why he may never return. And once you hear what Rowan finally confirmed, you may never look at Mr. Bean the same way again. Because behind every masterpiece, there's a reality most people never get to see. And this is his. What makes Rowan's recent confession even more surprising is understanding just how massive the character of Mr. Bean truly became. Because long before the pressure he described finally caught up to him, Mr. Bean started as a simple idea, a silent, almost cartoon-like man, navigating everyday life with the mind of a child. But that simplicity, which looks effortless on screen, didn't happen overnight. It was the result of Rowan pushing himself to create something completely different from traditional comedy. Something that didn't rely on punchlines or clever dialogue, but on pure, physical storytelling. And once that formula clicked, it exploded. As the show began gaining momentum in the early 90s, Rowan quickly realized he'd created something far bigger than the team expected. Episodes that took weeks to plan were suddenly being watched in over 190 countries, crossing language barriers like it was nothing. Kids who didn't understand English laughed just as hard as adults who did. And with each new episode, expectations rose higher. The success only intensified when the films arrived, turning the character from a British television oddity into a global comedy icon. But the more Mr. Bean grew, the more Rowan felt something shifting behind the scenes. What started as a creative experiment became a responsibility. One that demanded perfection every time he stepped into costume. And while audiences were celebrating the slapstick magic, only Rowan truly knew how much precision, timing, and control went into every blink, stumble, and confused frown. That contrast created a quiet tension, one he rarely discussed publicly. And it was that hidden pressure, the one buried beneath worldwide praise, that slowly began shaping the truth he would reveal decades later. Because the bigger Mr. Bean became, the more Rowan realized he had created something he couldn't easily escape. As the character's popularity soared, Rowan found himself trapped in a strange emotional space, grateful for the success, yet increasingly weighed down by the expectations it carried. And this feeling didn't come from ego or exhaustion alone. It came from understanding that every mistake, every mistimed expression, every offbeat gesture could break the illusion that millions loved. Silent comedy is brutally unforgiving. Without dialogue to cover a stumble, the performance has to be sharp, precise, and deeply intentional. And Rowan, a perfectionist by nature, carried that burden quietly. The rest of the world saw a man who made humor look effortless. But on set, Rowan was constantly analyzing, recalculating, and fine-tuning every physical movement. Crew members often noted that he wasn't the loud, chaotic personality Mr. Bean portrayed. Instead, he was quiet, observant, deliberate. The character demanded so much mental focus that filming often drained him more than fans realized. And as the years passed, the weight didn't lessen. It grew heavier. This pressure became even more intense when the movies came along. Suddenly, scenes had bigger budgets, bigger stunts, and bigger audiences waiting to critique every moment. With that came long days, repeated takes, and constant self-drive to get each physical gag exactly right. Rowan rarely complained. He delivered every time. But even while he kept the world laughing, inside, he was beginning to feel that something was slipping. A sense of joy that once fueled the character. And that private struggle explains why his recent honesty hit fans so deeply. Because Rowan wasn't just revealing discomfort. He was acknowledging years of silent strain that shaped the entire production. What he shared wasn't a complaint, but a quiet truth he'd carried alone. And the reason he's speaking about it now pulls us straight into the heart of what really happened on set. When Rowan recently admitted that performing Mr. Bean was stressful and exhausting, it wasn't an exaggeration. It was a window into what the set actually felt like for him. And understanding that requires seeing the huge difference between what viewers saw on screen and what Rowan was living behind the camera. While most actors could lean on dialogue, improvisation, or chemistry with co-stars, Rowan had none of those tools. Every moment was built on physical timing and facial control. If he raised an eyebrow at the wrong moment, the whole joke collapsed. And because the jokes were silent, retakes were frequent. A seemingly simple scene, like Bean trying to get dressed, dealing with a bee, or navigating a routine task, often took hours of choreographed planning. Crew members watched Rowan repeat tiny movements again and again, sometimes 20 or 30 times, to get the rhythm perfect. The physicality wasn't lighthearted for him. It was pressure-driven and nerve-tightening. Even more challenging was the emotional toll. Fans assumed the set was laughter-packed, but many days were the opposite. When a gag failed repeatedly, Rowan internalized the responsibility. If the scene didn't land, he didn't blame the script, the set, or the direction. He blamed himself. That level of self-expectation created an atmosphere that was far more intense than the public ever knew. And as Mr. Bean became more iconic, the expectations on set grew. Everyone involved knew they weren't filming just another comedy episode. They were creating something millions would watch and rewatch. The pressure to maintain that level of excellence made the environment almost surgical in its precision. So when Rowan finally confessed that the role was not pleasant to perform, he wasn't speaking out of frustration. He was speaking from years of silently carrying the weight of a character the world adored. But the toll didn't just affect the production. It began affecting his relationship with the character itself, which leads directly into the next turning point. Rowan's decision to finally open up about the strain didn't come overnight. It was the result of years of aging, reflection, and understanding that he no longer needed to hide behind the character's success. As he approached his late 60s, something shifted inside him. The need to protect the mythology of Mr. Bean gave way to a desire to protect his own well-being. And the moment he spoke honestly, everything made sense in a way fans had never considered before. He revealed that the physical intensity required to bring Mr. Bean to life became harder with age. The energy, the contortions, the exaggerated movements, all of it demanded a young performer's agility. But Rowan wasn't just aging physically, he was evolving emotionally. He had spent decades carrying the expectations of a global fandom, and now he was finally admitting that the pressure no longer aligned with who he was. But there was another layer to his confession, one that added even more weight to his words. The realization that perfection had overshadowed joy. The very thing that made Mr. Bean magical, its precision, became the reason it drained him. And as he reflected on the years he devoted to this single character, he realized it had shaped him in ways both beautiful and heavy. So when Rowan finally confirmed what really happened on set, that the stress, the pressure, and the responsibility were overwhelming, it wasn't a complaint. It was closure. He wasn't criticizing the character. He was honoring the truth behind its creation. And with that honesty, he allowed fans to see the man behind the magic for the first time, setting the stage for the next chapters of his life, and raising the biggest question of all. Would he ever play Mr. Bean again? What makes Rowan's honesty even more powerful is understanding the deeper cost of carrying a character so beloved that the world could barely separate the man from the performance. Because while fans celebrated Mr. Bean's innocence and charm, Rowan was grappling with something far more complicated: the expectation to remain flawless. And that expectation didn't just exist on set. It followed him everywhere he went. Whenever he appeared in public, people didn't approach him as Rowan Atkinson. They approached him as Bean. They expected the smirks, the clumsy body language, the exaggerated expressions. And even though Rowan was famously private and naturally quiet, strangers assumed he was the same chaotic figure they watched on screen. That mismatch between who he was and who the world wanted him to be became one of the heaviest burdens he carried. This pressure seeped into his creative choices as well. With every new project, people compared his performances to Mr. Bean. Even in films like Johnny English, where Rowan played a completely different type of comedic character, interviews inevitably shifted back to Bean. The legacy overshadowed everything else. And while Rowan appreciated the love and admiration, he couldn't ignore the reality that the character had become both a blessing and a cage. The longer this continued, the clearer it became that the perfection surrounding Mr. Bean wasn't accidental. It was the result of Rowan relentlessly pushing himself to deliver something extraordinary, even when the process drained him. That dedication is what made the character timeless, but it's also what slowly chipped away at Rowan's joy for performing him. So when he revealed how difficult the role truly was, it wasn't a surprise to those who knew him personally. It was the first time he allowed the world to understand the emotional weight behind the laughter. And that truth leads straight into the next question fans couldn't stop asking. Once Rowan admitted the stress behind performing Mr. Bean, fans naturally wondered whether he'd ever return to the role. And the answer, though gentle and respectful, made it clear: the era of live-action Bean was over. But understanding why he stepped away reveals a lot about the kind of person Rowan truly is. As he entered his late 60s, Rowan realized something the public often overlooks. Physical comedy is one of the most demanding forms of performance. It requires stamina, quick reflexes, sharp movements, and precise timing. All elements that become harder with age, no matter how talented the performer is. And while many actors continue action-heavy roles into their 60s and 70s, physical comedy is different. It blends athleticism with split-second comedic reflexes. Even the smallest stumble or facial twitch carries meaning. But beyond the physical strain was the emotional realization that the character demanded too much of him at this stage of life. Rowan has always been intentional with his work. He doesn't chase projects for attention or relevance. He chooses carefully, often spending years planning a single role. And with Mr. Bean, the cost of perfection no longer matched the joy it once brought. Still, he didn't abandon the character entirely. He continued contributing to the animated series, where he could voice Bean without the physical intensity. That allowed him to keep the character alive for younger audiences, without sacrificing his well-being. But live-action Bean, the version the world grew up with, became something he knew he had to let go. And his decision wasn't dramatic or emotional. It was thoughtful. It was honest. It was the choice of a man who had given everything he could to a character he loved, and who now needed to preserve the parts of himself that the world never got to see. And that clarity brings us to the question of legacy, a chapter Rowan never expected to confront so directly. With Rowan finally opening up about the hidden challenges of playing Mr. Bean, fans began seeing the character in a new light, not as an endless source of comedy, but as a masterpiece shaped by sacrifice. And that shift pushed Rowan into an unexpected position, confronting the legacy he had built, one he never fully intended to define his career. Rowan always believed in variety. He studied engineering, became fascinated with machinery, excelled in drama, and built characters ranging from cunning spies to eccentric villains. In his mind, Bean was one piece of a larger artistic identity. But for the world, Bean became the defining piece. And as Rowan aged, that reality grew harder to escape. Yet, despite the pressure and the stress, Rowan never rejected the character. He simply wanted people to understand that behind the universal laughter was a human being who worked tirelessly to make it happen. That honesty created a new kind of respect, not just for the character, but for the man behind it. Suddenly, fans weren't just celebrating Mr. Bean. They were appreciating Rowan's brilliance, discipline, and vulnerability. This shift in perspective revealed something Rowan never talked about publicly: his fear of disappointing the fans. Even after decades of playing the character, he worried that one wrong move, one lackluster scene, could tarnish what the world had come to love. That pressure, more than anything, shaped the emotional cost of the role. And now, with the truth finally shared, Rowan is seeing something he never expected: fans supporting his decision to step back. Instead of demanding more, they're expressing gratitude. Instead of disappointment, they're sending appreciation. And in many ways, that response has allowed Rowan to accept the legacy he spent years running from. But accepting that legacy opens the door to the final question: what comes next for Rowan Atkinson? Now that Rowan has finally revealed what really happened on the Mr. Bean set, fans have started wondering what his next chapter will look like, and whether this newfound honesty signals a shift in the kind of work he'll pursue. And the truth is, Rowan seems ready for a gentler, more deliberate phase in his career. One where he can choose roles that challenge him creatively, without draining him physically or emotionally. Rowan has hinted that he now prefers projects that allow him to explore deeper, more mature acting styles. Characters who rely on wit rather than acrobatics, dialogue rather than contortions, emotion rather than exaggerated chaos. He's also found peace in the animated world of Bean, where he can still bring the character to life, without the physical strain that once dominated his days on set. But beyond acting, Rowan is also returning to the passions he set aside during Bean's peak years: engineering, cars, and hands-on problem-solving. Fans who follow him closely know that he enjoys staying out of the spotlight, focusing on quiet hobbies rather than constant media attention. And now, Without the weight of carrying Bean in live action, he finally has space to enjoy that simplicity. What his confession really taught the world was that even icons need room to breathe. Even legends outgrow the characters that made them famous. And even the funniest man in the room can carry invisible pressure that no one notices until he decides to speak. So, as Rowan steps into this new chapter, one thing becomes certain. He may be turning the page on Mr. Bean, but the character's legacy and Rowan's contribution to global comedy will live on long after the cameras stop rolling. And that truth, more than anything he revealed, is what every fan will carry with them.